Okay, so the title of this talk is The New World Disorder. During the early stages of World War II, Britain went through a period subsequently called, or referred to as, the Phony War, in which Britain was officially at war with Germany, but nothing happened. No shots were fired, no bombs were dropped, and the British people on the whole did not find their way of life significantly affected by being at war with Germany. The war seemed to be a phony war. Now there's an interesting point of comparison with this today in the relationship that exists between the West and Islam. Officially, the West is not at war with Islam, and the British government seems to be at pains to reassure everyone that Islam is a religion of peace, despite historical and contemporary evidence to the contrary. However, the reality of the situation is that Islam is conducting a war against the West, both ideologically and physically. This hostile situation can only be described as a phony peace. But unlike those who ruled Britain during World War II, who recognised the enemy and not merely the threat of violence posed by a few extremists in the German army, our politicians today are too weak and feeble-minded to face the truth. And that's what psychologists call denial. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that all Muslims are terrorists, nor that all Muslims want war with the West, nor does it mean that all Muslims approve of the terrorist activities of modern Islamic fundamentalists. Doubtless, many Muslims want to live in peace with the West, and even have a view of Islam that stresses peaceful coexistence as the right attitude to the non-Islamic world. But neither did war with Germany mean that all Germans were members of the German army or the SS. Nor did it mean that all Germans wanted war with Britain. Nor did it mean that all Germans approved of the activities and philosophy of the German government. We know that there were many Germans, both within and outside Germany, who did not want war, who wanted to live in peace with the rest of Europe, and thoroughly disapproved of the philosophy and activities of the Nazis. But this fact did not change the fact that there were enough Germans who did want to subjugate Europe to the yoke of German rule by the force of arms to make German aggression possible, and most importantly, and this is where the point of greatest comparison lies, there were enough Germans who were prepared to acquiesce in the philosophy and activities of the Nazi Party to enable it to rise to power and turn the possibility of German aggression into a reality that terrorized Europe. Had those who ruled Britain during World War II adopted the same attitude towards Germany at the outbreak of the World War that our present rulers have adopted towards Islam, the modern history of Britain and Europe would have been very different. Now, there's of course a very significant difference. Britain has not declared war on Islam, and British people and people in the Western nations generally do not want war with Islam. But Islam has already declared war on the West. Islamic teaching divides the world into two groups. The House of Islam, Dar-ul-Islam, that's to say those subject to Islam, and the House of War, Dar-ul-Harb, those who are not subject to Islam. The world is divided into two groups like this by Islamic teaching. The goal of Islam is the conquest of the House of War, and that means unequivocally the Islamization of the West, by force if necessary. And therefore the Prophet taught, I want you to read this, I'm going to put it up on the screen. This is what the Prophet taught. I am commanded to fight against men until they bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is God's messenger. Only by pronouncing these words can they make their property and blood secure from me. Now this is from several collections of hadith. Hadith are collected sayings of the prophets, and they have lineage. They can either have a strong lineage or a weak lineage. This has a strong lineage. It's a well-attested statement of the Prophet. Sahih Bukhari is a collection of the Prophet's saying. These are not in the Quran. And Sunan Abu Dawud, again, a collection of sayings that have strong lineage. The importance of hadiths for Islamic doctrine is not generally appreciated by non-Muslims in the West. It's generally thought that the Quran is the main source of Islamic teaching, and in particular, that Sharia law is based on the Quran. This is incorrect. Abbas Zaidi, writing from Pakistan in the spring 2000 issue of the Salisbury Review, stated the matter in this way. In many countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, the hadiths are taken to be on a par with the Quran, and along with the Quran have been made into the supreme source of Muslim law. Also, in many cases, the Quranic injunctions have been put aside in favour of the hadiths. The Taliban and the Wahhabis never allow the Quran to be read in a local language, but the hadiths are always available in local languages. Why? Because you can justify anything from the hadiths, from the honour killings of women to the killing of Shias, Ahmadis and Christians. The Islamic jurists say that any Muslim who turns apostate, that's to say, abandons the Islamic religion, must be killed in accordance with the Islamic law. But in the Quran, Allah explicitly says that if anyone becomes an apostate, it is between him and me, and that such a person will be dealt with on the day of judgment. Interestingly, those Muslim intellectuals who have now and in the past pleaded against the validity of the hadiths have been declared non-Muslims by the Saudi-funded Islamic Inquisition. Now, that's not my statement. That's a statement of somebody from Pakistan who knows the situation from inside. The hadiths are very important. It is not appreciated that the hadiths are at least as important, in some ways more important for Sharia law than the Quran. All this talk about the Quran and what the Quran says is very often missing the point when we come to this issue. The hadiths are supremely important in this matter. And the hadith, this is a strong hadith. This is what we're up against with Islam. I am commanded to fight against men until they bear witness there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is God's messenger. Only by pronouncing these words can they make their property and blood secure from me. Now that's been lived out throughout history, and it's been lived out again today. Islam sees itself at war with the non-Islamic world, and it considers all means necessary to achieve conquest of the house of war as legitimate. This is so because Islam has no doctrine of common law. Those who are not in the house of Islam have no protection from Islamic law. They are outlaws, that's to say they are beyond the protection of the law. They're outlaws in the true or old sense of the term. And this is why apostates, that's to say Muslims who convert to another religion, in Islamic cultures and countries can be murdered with impunity, and they are frequently. Christians are murdered frequently in Pakistan, and the authorities do nothing about it. The same happens in other Muslim countries. Muslims do not deny the nature of the conflict between the House of Islam and the House of War. Why then do Western politicians deny it at every turn and seek to convince people that Islam is a religion of peace? Fear? Whistling in the dark will not save us from the fearful consequences of failing to face the issue. Is it political correctness and an ideological commitment to the absurd doctrine of multiculturalism That's to say, the creation of a multi-religious society that blinds our leaders to the truth. But multiculturalism has been an abysmal failure. Now, by multiculturalism, there's a tendency amongst media pundits and political people to equate multiculturalism with multiracial society, and this is not the case. It is religion that drives culture, and a multicultural society is a multi-religious society. It's nothing to do with race, it's to do with religion, because religion is largely the externalization of culture. What is clear is that our leaders have no real answer to the situation we face, and this is because they do not understand the problem in the first place. The modern debate on violence originating in religious fanaticism is unbalanced, lacks historical perspective, and assumes the validity of the secular humanist ideology, which is often infused with ill-considered propaganda. It's religion that provides the foundations for all civilizations. Without a stable religious foundation, no civilization can survive. British civilization, and indeed much of Western civilization generally, is collapsing today because the religious foundations upon which it was built have been shattered by the liberal secular humanist agenda, which has systematically attacked and uprooted the Christian values that underpinned our way of life for over a millennium. But secular humanism is also a religion. It has its own worldview with a particular understanding of the origin, nature, meaning, value, and purpose of life. While it is true that much violence has been committed in the name of Christianity and Islam throughout history, it is secular humanism that has proved to be the most intolerant and persecuting of all religions. The secular state has been responsible for more deaths, both in war and as a result of the various secular humanist inquisitions and witch hunts carried out in the 20th century, than all religious persecutions in other religious persecutions in history put together. The current estimates put the number of those killed by the secular state during the 20th century between 110 million people and 231 million people. I want to read you something now about these figures. I shall move this up as we go along. It may be a bit difficult to read. The consequences for mankind of the idolatry of political power by modern secular states have been immense, from the reign of terror unleashed by the French Revolution to the mass murder programs of national and international socialism. Leaving aside those killed by the two world wars, over 100 million people were murdered in the 20th century alone by secular states in the pursuit of the religious ideals of secular humanism. Now, this is a fairly conservative figure, though not the most conservative. Gil Elliot, writing in 1972, estimated the total number of man-made deaths in the 20th century up to that point, including both world wars, between 80 and 150 million, and he assumed as a mean figure 110 million, with World War I accounting for about 10 million deaths and World War II accounting for about 4 million deaths. Sorry, 40 million deaths, beg your pardon. A more recent conservative estimate, again including both world wars, has put the total number killed at 188 million. A less conservative estimate puts the figure at 231 million. According to Jung Chan and John Halliday, the Chinese Communist state alone was responsible for over 70 million peacetime deaths under the leadership of Mao Zedong. Commenting on state activity in the 20th century, Paul Johnson writes, quote, "The state has proved itself an insatiable spender, an unrivaled waster. It has also proved itself the greatest killer of all time. By the late 1990s, the state had been responsible for the violent or unnatural deaths of some 135 million people during the century. more perhaps than it had succeeded in destroying during the whole of human history up to 1900. Its inhuman malevolence, I beg your pardon, had more than kept pace with its growing size and expanding being, unquote. Likewise, Neil Ferguson states that, quote, the 100 years after 1900 were without question the bloodiest century in modern history, far more violent in relative as well as absolute terms than any previous era, unquote. The secular humanist state has been responsible for more deaths, both in war and as a result of the various secular humanist inquisitions and witch-hunts carried out in the 20th century, than any other form of religious establishment in history. In 1957, only halfway through the 20th century, Denis de Rougemont stated that, quote, the wars of this century killed more men than all the other wars of our history, unquote. Now, those are not my comments, they're not my ideas. Those are the statements of historians of the 20th century. Strangely enough, even the Marxist historian, Eric Hobsbawm, who was quoted this morning, I believe, even he, a Marxist, acknowledged that the 20th century was, quote, an era of religious wars, though the most militant and bloodthirsty of its religions were secular ideologies of 19th century vintage, such as socialism and nationalism, whose God equivalents were either abstractions or politicians venerated in the manner of divinities, unquote. Again, this is not a Christian speaking, this is a Marxist historian, a well-known Marxist historian. But secular humanism is weak in that it has failed to provide a stable foundation for civilization. Nor is this a problem that can be corrected. The spiritual and moral relativism that lies at the heart of secular humanism's core values makes it impossible for secular humanism to function as a stable foundation for civilization. Consequently, it is not able to withstand the onslaught of a religion like Islam, which does not kowtow to its politically correct and multicultural shibboleths, and is determined to bring the whole world under the yoke of Allah. Like its offspring, multiculturalism, secular humanism is a temporary phenomenon, a staging post in a process of transition from one civilization to another. Eventually, the secular humanist multicultural society will buckle under the dominating influence of a religion that does provide a stable foundation for civilization. What then is the answer to the situation we now face? Islam is a religion. It cannot be defeated by military means. Now, this does not mean that Western states should not use the force of arms to secure their borders, defend their people against acts of terror and war, and bring to justice those who commit such acts. But this is a more limited goal than the defeat of Islam. Islam is a false religion, as is secular humanism. And both can only be defeated by a revival of the true religion. Without a return to Christianity as the true religion, the nations of the Western world will not be able to survive the corrupting and destructive influences of secular humanism, nor will they be able to withstand the challenge of Islam. And in this we see the judgment of God upon the nations working itself out in history. Now, this is not the first time that Islam has challenged the West. Christendom has repeatedly faced the challenge of Islam on its eastern and southern borders. In the 8th century, Islam conquered most of Spain, and this was followed by Islamic conquests in Sicily and parts of southern Italy. The Muslims were finally defeated in Sicily in 1091, and Islamic power in the Mediterranean began to wane thereafter. But it was not until 1492 that the last Muslim city of Spain, Granada, was recaptured by Christian forces. In the 13th and 14th centuries, Islam made conquests in the Balkans and parts of Greece. Constantinople fell to Islamic forces in 1453, and Greece was ruled by Muslims for nearly 400 years. Vienna was besieged by the Ottoman army in 1529, and the threat of Islam against the eastern border of Europe was only brought to an end by the Battle of Vienna in 1683 and the subsequent defeat of Islam in Hungary and Transylvania. Islam has always been the greatest external threat that Christendom has faced. Why? Because Islam is the scourge of God upon the nations of the apostate West. The moral relativism and godlessness of secular humanism has brought the modern Western world to its present state of disorder. The new world order that contemporary Western politicians are seeking to create has been and continues to be a disaster. It's created more problems than it has solved. The domestic and this international disorder we currently face is the social and political consequence of the godlessness, decadence, and immorality of Western society. Islam functions in this situation as the scourge of God upon the apostasy of the West. This state of apostasy and the social disorder that inevitably accompanies it cannot last indefinitely. The nations of the West face a choice. They can kiss the Son and receive his blessing, or they can continue in their rebellion against the Lord Jesus Christ and perish by the way, which is what we're told in Psalm 2. There is no third option, and despite the myopia of our religious and political leaders, the writing is all too clearly on the wall for everyone to see. This is precisely what the challenge of Islam in the modern world demonstrates. It is secular humanism that has brought the modern world to its present state of disorder. But secular humanism is a kind of Christian heresy in that it is the prodigal offspring of Christendom, initially borrowing its values, its moral, intellectual, social, and cultural capital from the heritage Christianity has put at the disposal of the Western world, but eventually corrupting these values and putting the social, intellectual, cultural and moral capital that they have created to godless ends. The answer to this situation is repentance. And remember, repentance means a change of mind. That's what the word means in the New Testament, a change of mind. So the answer is a change of mind on the part of the West regarding the Christian faith that the West has rejected. Only a return to the faith upon which Christian Western civilization was built can deliver us from this state of disorder and the inevitable consequence of it, the scourge of Islam.